Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to unpack sources, get you up to speed fast.
Glad to be here.
So today we're digging into something specific. The Cordyceps brain infection from The Last of Us. You know, how did that whole nightmare actually start?
Right, and it's a fascinating starting point because many people might initially think viruses. Right?
Exactly. But the show, especially that opening scene, the 1968 one, it makes a big deal about it being a fungus.
Yes, the epidemiologist points out the real horror. Unlike viruses, we have almost no treatments, no cures for fungal pandemics. It sets, a very different kind of apocalyptic tone.
Definitely a different feel. So our mission, let's say, is to explore those origins. How did it kick off in the game versus the HBO series? Because they aren't quite the same.
They really aren't.
Yeah.
The real-world basis is key, though. Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, the zombie ant fungus.
Which sounds like science fiction already. You see it in documentaries, right? Like Planet Earth.
Precisely. It infects an ant, controls its mind, makes it climb high up.
So the fungus can release its spores effectively. Wild stuff.
Absolutely wild. But the crucial step for this story is the fictional leap. It mutates. It finds a way to infect humans.
Which, in reality, is tough. Our body temperature, our immune systems, they're pretty good barriers against most fungi.
Generally, yes. And this is where the HBO show offers a, let's say, compelling mechanism.
Climate change, right?
Exactly. The idea floated is that as the world gets warmer, fungi are forced to adapt to survive in higher temperatures.
Uh-huh.
And if they adapt to warmer environments, well, the jump to adapting to our internal body temperature becomes theoretically less of a hurdle.
That feels very now. It taps into current anxieties, makes the threat seem less purely sci-fi and maybe a bit more plausible for you listening.
I think that's the goal, yeah. It grounds the horror in something tangible, a real-world concern we're all aware of.
Okay, so that's the show's angle. But the game, it was a bit different, wasn't it? Less specific, maybe.
It was more subtle in its delivery. You piece it together. There's that newspaper clipping Joel has at the start.
Right. Contaminated crops from South America. Agricultural products.
Yes. It mentions investigations, the FDA looking into it, product recalls.
Yeah.
But clearly, whatever measures were taken, they failed. Too little, too late.
Which is interesting, like you said, how you find that out. In the game, it's background detail. The show gives us that direct flashback.
Which takes us to Jakarta, Indonesia. That's the show's ground zero. And importantly, it sets the outbreak in 2003, a full decade earlier than the game's 2013 date.
That scene with the mycologist, Ibu Ratna, finding the infected worker in the flour mill, it's chilling.
And the setting is deliberate. A massive flour and grain factory. She immediately recognizes it's a perfect substrate for the fungus.
Substrate, meaning like the perfect food source and environment for it to just grow.
Exactly that. Perfect conditions. And this shift from general crops to specifically flour and grain is huge.
Because Joel explains it later, right? How basic ingredients like flour, maybe sugar, get into everything.
All the mass-produced stuff.
Yeah.
Bread, cereal, pancake mixes, things shipped globally.
Which connects back to that theory about Joel and Sarah skipping the pancakes and biscuits that morning. The showrunners even said that was intentional.
A terrifying little detail of contingency, yeah.
Okay, so quick recap of the differences. Game is South America, vague crops, 2013. Show is Jakarta, specific flour grain, 2003, plus the climate change idea.
Right. And you have to ask, why make those changes for the show?
What do you think? It seems like they wanted it to feel maybe a bit more scientifically grounded.
That's likely part of it. Jakarta as a specific industrial hub feels perhaps more concrete than just crops from South America.
Oh.
Also, post-COVID, audiences might have a higher pandemic literacy. So differentiating the fungal threat, leaning into its unique aspects, maybe felt necessary. Plus, Jakarta broadens the scope beyond just the U.S., even if wider global plans were apparently cut.
And they changed the transmission too, didn't they? No spores in the show.
Right, they swapped airborne spores for tendrils and that whole interconnected network idea, which is, itself, inspired by real-world fungal networks, mycorrhizal networks.
That network idea. It makes the infected feel less like individual monsters and more like one big coordinated threat. It's creepy.
It definitely changes the dynamic. But despite the differences in origin details and transmission.
The initial spread mechanism is pretty similar, contaminated food.
Yes. Whether it's general crops or flour-based products, the result is the same. Contaminated food staples get distributed far and wide very quickly.
Leading to simultaneous outbreaks almost everywhere, overwhelming any possible defense.
Exactly. It explains the rapid collapse of society that both the game and show depict so effectively. Symptoms hit fast, chaos erupts.
So you might be sitting there thinking, okay, but why isn't contaminated food still the main problem years later?
Well, a few reasons. First, those massive global food production and distribution systems. They completely collapse with society.
Makes sense. No more factories churning out pancake mix.
Right. Second, those initial contaminated batches were either consumed, destroyed, or they spoiled. And third, the primary transmission route shifted.
To direct contact with the infected. Bites, scratches, or those tendrils in the show.
Plus, cooking kills most fungi. So simple heating would neutralize the threat in food, generally speaking. But that initial wave, before anyone knew what was happening.
That's the kicker, like Joel and Sarah dodging the flour that morning just by chance. Pure luck.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The food contamination was the ignition point. After that, the fire spread person to person.
So wrapping up, game points to South American crops. Show zooms in on Jakarta flour mill contamination, possibly linked to climate change. Both use contaminated food as the trigger for global catastrophe.
It really highlights the vulnerability, which leads to maybe a final thought for you.
Yoar.
Given how much we rely on these huge interconnected global supply chains for, well, almost everything we consume, what other everyday products, things we barely think about, could potentially become a vector for some future pathogen, something unexpected, catching us completely off guard? It's certainly something to ponder.
Definitely is. Okay, that's our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.